20th of February 1933, Hitler and Goering met leaders of German industry in order to point out the dangers of Marxism and, more importantly, that there was no cash in the Nazi piggy bank to fight the forthcoming elections. The previous year there had been 2 general elections and 1 presidential election, together with scores of local elections which had taken their toll on party finances. Of course, this affected the other parties as well, but one thing the Nazis were really good at was public relations, and they managed more rallies than any other party. A Nazi rally was not just a political event. They would arrange some entertainment, a band, a dance, some beer, some food, and whereas these events were not free, they were not money spinners either. Today, this is all part of normal electioneering, but then it was quite revolutionary. To ensure that they got their point across, the Nazis brought in their big names to ensure a bigger crowd, something other parties did not do as a rule. In this photograph, for example, we can see the World War I hero General Litzmann addressing the audience. President Hindenburg had considered electioneering below him. He won the 1932 presidential elections without making a single public appearance. Even at the recently held local elections in the tiny state of Lippe in January 1933, the Nazis had brought in all their best known personalities, which no other party did. The result was a strong vote for the Nazis, around 39%, which suggested that they might be able to overturn the losses they had suffered in the November 1932 general election. That brings us to the secret meeting of the 20th of February 1933. A number of industrialists were invited by Hermann Goering to his official residence in the Reichstag presidential palace. Most of the invitations were sent out on the 13th of February 1933, although some went out later. The stated purpose was that Hitler would like to explain his ideas, and as he was then Chancellor, attendance cannot be seen as showing support for either him, his party, or his policies. A meeting of this nature is quite normal between politicians and business leaders. I, for example, once attended such a meeting when I owned a business. The list of invitees was drawn up by Goering and his adjutant. Hjalmar Schacht later said, almost all the men in German industry from all sectors were represented, and he was not aware of anyone who had not accepted the invitation. However, representatives from mining and heavy industry made up the bulk of attendees. Furthermore, there were those that did not attend. On the 18th of February 1933, a letter was sent out by Gustav Krupp, Ludwig Kastel and Jakob Herle to various industrialists suggesting that attendees do what they can to ensure that the economic policy of the new government takes into account the necessities of life and justified demands of industry, and to leave no stone unturned in order to successfully maintain our position. The letter suggests that all of them should work for a stable government, but left the practical conclusions from this general principle to the sense of responsibility of every individual industrialist. Krupp had even planned a small speech for the event. 3 invitees did not attend. Paul Reusch, head of the Gute Hoffnungshütte conglomerate, was abroad, but he did meet Hitler later and promised that his newspapers would remain neutral during the election campaign. Robert Bosch said that Berlin was too far away, and as they had not given him enough notice, he wasn't going to get there on time given his age. Karl Friedrich von Siemens more or less told Goering what he could do with his invitation. However, others from his companies did attend. Let's have a look at some of the people who were at the secret meeting. The photographs of some may give away part of the plot as to what their post-war fate was. Indeed, I think this is a good subject for future videos. And I also must apologise, it's not that easy getting photographs, particularly photographs that reflect the time. Ideally, I would have found photographs from 1933 for the lot, but it's not easy. Anyway, if you've got any photographs, and maybe if I do a future video, you can send them to me. So, back to the story. Whereas Goering invited the guests, it was Hjalmar Schacht, the former and future president of the Reichsbank, who largely organized it. Schacht was later tried at Nuremberg. Fritz Springorum from Hirsch AG. In 1932, he had written to industrialists, urging them to do what they could to get the National Socialist Party to drop its more radical demands and to bring it into the main line. Gustav Krupp was chairman of the supervisory board of Friedrich Krupp AG, a company noted for weapons manufacture, although of course it made other things as well. Albert Wögler was the chairman of the board of steel producer Vereinigte Stahlwerke AG. Ernst Tengelmann and Herbert Coward from the mining company Gelsenkirchener Bergswerk AG, August Rasterg and August Dien from Wintershall AG. This company was involved in potash mining and as from 1930 in crude oil as well. Ernst Brand and Hans von und zu Löwenstein from the Dortmund District Mining Authority. Karl Buren, who was General Director of Lignite Producer, Braun Kohlen und Briquette Industrie AG, and who was board member of the German Employers Association. Günther Hübel, who was the General Director of Lignite Producer Heyer Braunkohlenwerke AG and board member of the German Employees Association also. Paul Stein, chairman of the August Victoria Colliery and member of the board of directors at IG Farben. Georg von Schnitzler, who was on the board of IG Farben. Hugo Stinners Jr., board member of the Confederation of German Industry and a member of the supervisory board of the Rhine-Westphalian Coal Syndicate. Edward Schulte was general director of Geischer Zinc and Mining Company. Fritz von Opel, board member of Adam Opel AG, motor vehicle manufacturing company, and possibly the best known company today of all of those here. Possibly, I said. Ludwig von Winterfeld, board member of Siemens and Hasker AG and Siemens Schuckertwerk AG. Wolf Dietrich von Witzleben, who was from the head office of Siemens. Wolfgang Reuter, who was the general director of industrial conglomerate Demag, chairman of the Association of German Mechanical Engineering Institutions, presidential member of the Reich Association of German Industry. Gunther Quandt, industrialist and first husband of Magda Goebbels. Ludwig Graut headed the Iron and Steel Industrialist Association, Verein Deutscher Eisen- und Stahlindustrieller. Kurt Schmidt, board member of Allianz AG. August von Fink, who was on numerous supervisory boards and on specialist committees. Erich Fickler, who was general director of mining company Harpener Bergbau AG and on the board of various other companies. Friedrich Flick, who had various business interests. So the meeting kicked off with Hermann Goering keeping everyone waiting for 15 minutes. Well, that must have shown who was boss. With hindsight, this can only be seen as having been done deliberately, because, after all, the Nazis were now in charge in Germany. When he eventually turned up, he was accompanied by Walter Funk. They said a few words about the ongoing election campaign. Then Hitler appeared in a very respectable business suit with his adjutant. He shook hands going around the table with everyone gathered. Behaving quietly and in a deferential manner, he took a seat at the head of the table. He spoke softly for 90 minutes. The most important parts of his speech being his belief in private property, something that must have worried those present, given not only the risk of the communists winning an election, but also the original program of the Nazi Party itself. Hitler outlined some of his economic ideas, which according to notes of some of the attendees showed no understanding of economic matters whatsoever. Hitler promised that there would be no economics experiments, which just went to show that he had no idea on how to turn an economy around, and indeed his recipe would be to continue as before. However, he did have some ideas on government. Bearing in mind that many of those present believed in the establishment, were opposed to the Weimar Republic, and were probably monarchists at heart, Hitler pointed out the benefits, as he saw them, of an authoritarian regime over democracy. Weimar, he said, brought about the risk of communism. He claimed that only the Nazis could save Germany from the Bolshevik threat. He promised to increase military spending, something which would appeal to those in heavy industry, claiming that only a well-defended nation can have a flourishing economy, although he said nothing of territorial expansion. Hitler wanted to use all of the power of the state to overthrow communism. He said that the Nazis needed to win 10 more seats in the Prussian state elections and 33 more seats in the national parliament to make this possible. As the Nazis had lost 34 seats in the previous elections, this should have rung alarm bells. Hitler was noted for telling his audience what they wanted to hear. The Armed Forces High Command wanted to hear about territorial expansion, so he told them about that, but this is a subject which would have shocked the business leaders, so to them he only mentioned increased military spending, which would have been good for their bank balances as they supplied either directly or indirectly the military. What worried business was communism, the threat of having their businesses expropriated, and of strikes, trade unions, workers' council, and unrealistic wage demands. Once Hitler had finished, Krupp expressed his thanks and emphasized the commitment to private property and defense. Hitler then politely left, and Goering once more pointed out that the Nazi piggy bank was empty. Then Goering left the meeting, and Hjalmar Schacht said, "And now, gentlemen, to the cash register." Schacht demanded that 3 million Reichsmarks be raised and stated where he expected the cash to come from. 1 million Reichsmarks was to come from the Western coal and iron industry, 500,000 from the chemical industry, 500,000 from potash mining, 500,000 from lignite mining, 300,000 from electrical engineering, and 100,000 each from the automotive and mechanical engineering sectors. It appears that none of the invitees had understood that they were being invited in order to make donations, although no doubt they were used to such requests. To put these sums in some form of context, industry had donated 12 million Reichsmarks to the presidential election campaign of Hindenburg, which was largely aimed against Hitler, and had even donated 4.8 million Reichsmarks to the 1919 general election. In other words, the Nazis were only asking for 1/4 of what big business had given Hindenburg only a few months previously. The difference here was that when they gave money to help Hindenburg get elected, they were attempting to buy stability, When they gave the Nazis money, they were not only attempting to buy stability, but also investing in people who they hoped would give them kickbacks in the form of government contracts. When President Paul Hindenburg appointed Hitler to the post of Chancellor at 11:30 in the morning of the 30th of January 1933, there were only 2 other Nazis in the cabinet. The other 8 cabinet members were conservatives around Franz von Papen and Alfred Hugenberg, who were trusted by business. Furthermore, as part of the deal that allowed Hitler to become Chancellor, Papen was granted the right to attend every meeting between Hitler and Hindenburg. Moreover, cabinet decisions were made by a majority vote. Papen believed that his conservative friends' majority in the cabinet and his closeness to Hindenburg would keep Hitler in check. The cabinet did not present a united front in the forthcoming elections. Franz von Papen teamed up with the boss of the conservative DNVP, Alfred Hugenberg, as well as Franz Selter and Theodor Duesterberg, the leaders of the Stahlhelm Soldiers' Union. On the 11th of February, this coalition became known as the Combat Front Black, White, Red, the colours of the old imperial flag. It was to this party and these people that business looked to keep the Nazis in check. A number of pledges were made at the meeting, but Wögler, Krupp, Fickler, Tengelmann, Lowenstein, Brandy and Springorum agreed to try and collect 1 million Reichsmarks, but then all services would have to be paid for. Originally, Schacht wanted to distribute the donations himself, but at the suggestion of Springorum. 75% of the funds would be given to the Nazis and 25% to the Combat Front Black, White, Red. Paul Stein of the August Victoria mine also suggested that the conservative DNVP get some of the cash. The next day, Fritz Springorum wrote to Paul Reusch. In this meeting, Herr Hitler gave a presentation of the political developments of the last 14 years and presented his basic attitude to political events, as well as the economy and private property, in such a way that he probably had the complete approval of all 27 gentlemen who were present. The managing director of the Industrial Employers Association, the RDI, Ludwig Kastel, however, wrote to Krupp on the 25th of February 1933, "I find it a great, if not to say unheard of, impertinence on industry to raise 3 million in a very short period of time. I'm outraged about the distribution, only 20% to the black, white, red bloc, but there's nothing I can do about it. After the elections, we will all have to have another look at this." Confirmed donations came to just over 2 million Reichsmarks, 1,660,000 Reichsmarks of which was received before election day. According to documents presented at the IG Farben trial in 1947-1948, payments were as follows to the Nationale Treuhand, Dr. Hjalmar Schacht account at Delbrück Schickland Co. Bank. On the 23rd of February, the Mining Association gave 200,000 Reichsmarks. The 24th of February, Karl Hermann, Chief Secretary to the Potash Advisory Board, gave 150,000. And the Automobile Exhibition in Berlin gave 100,000 on the same day. On the 25th of February, the Braunkohle und Briket Industry AG gave 200,000 and Denmark gave 50,000. On the 27th of February, Telefunken gave 35,000 and Osram 40,000. On the 28th of February, IG Farben gave 400,000, and on the 1st of March, Hjalmar Schacht gave 125,000 Reichsmarks, but where he got his hands on so much money, I'm unable to say. On the 3rd of March, Karl Lange from the machine industry gave 50,000 Reichsmarks, the Mining Association gave 100,000 Reichsmarks, the Karl Hermann gave 150,000 Reichsmarks, and AEG gave 60,000 marks. After the election, further donations were made. Fritz Frigorum gave 36,000. The Akkumulatorenfabrik AG, which was owned by Gunther Quandt, the first husband of Magda Goebbels, gave 25,000 marks. And on the 13th of March, the Mining Association gave a further 300,000 marks. So that brought the total a little short of the 3 million requested, but still a total of 2,021,000 Reichsmarks. In his memoirs, Hjalmar Schacht wrote about the meeting and states that 3 million Reichsmarks were raised. And of the 3,600,000 Reichsmarks remained after the election. In other words, big business completely funded this campaign. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary about the importance of this campaign donation for the Nazi Party. We raise a very large sum for the election, which relieves us of all the financial worries at one stroke. I immediately alert the whole propaganda machine, and an hour later the rotary machines are rattling. Now we're going to crank it up at full speed. Unless something goes really badly wrong, then we will have won across the board. As it turned out, the Nazis got the most votes in the elections of the 5th of March 1933, but failed to gain an absolute majority, despite the terror directed against its political opponents caused by the Nazis controlling the police in much of Germany. However, as a result of the election, they were able to force the Enabling Act of the 23rd of March 1933, which authorized the Nazi government to enact laws without the consent of the Reichstag. Krupp wrote to Hitler on the 24th of March 1933, "The elections have created the basis for stable government, and the disruptions that have arisen from the constant political fluctuations in the past and that have severely paralyzed economic initiative have been eliminated. The Reich Association of German Industry will do everything to help the Reich government with its difficult work." As a result of this secret meeting, those on the left have claimed that this proves that the Nazis were financed by big business. Now, I see this a bit differently. In my opinion, like von Papen and Hindenburg, who allowed Hitler to become Chancellor, thinking that they could control him, big business also thought the same. It realized the popularity of the Nazis on the ground and preferred them to the communists. It also realized the weakness of the German state to combat the enemies within. Money paid was a donation, but a donation, like in many places today, it was a favor in return for favors. The industrialists gave the cash to a political party, and in return they expected government contracts. In this case, most of them got them. You may, in the comments section, think of some examples from the last few years, maybe months, maybe weeks, or even days where exactly the same thing has taken place. There is an argument saying that some of those who paid up did so under duress. To a certain extent, that this may be a valid argument, as by then the Nazis had been in power for 3 weeks, and some may have feared a retaliation. Certainly, if you had a business, the last thing you'd want is a large group of angry SA men outside your gates, or as the Nazis controlled the police in Prussia, perhaps an investigation, searches of your premises, or trumped up charges that could lead to your arrest. Ian Kershaw says in his book on Hitler that this was political blackmail, and to a certain extent I agree. The responsibility of big business was to their shareholders and not to the Weimar Republic. Attempts at Bolshevik revolution had occurred in various parts of the country in the years after World War I. The question we now need to ask is what would have happened if the industrialists had not given the cash? The answer to that is I don't know, but given that the elections were not really fair anyway, I would argue that perhaps it would not have had a major impact. Some of the people at the meeting benefited from new business once the Nazis had taken power, particularly during the war years. Others saw no change. Some of them ended up being tried for their deeds after the war. Some held on to their fortunes. Some of them ended up in the resistance and paying a very high price for their later opposition to Hitler. Well, all of these are various stories, and I might come back to them sometime in the future. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that interesting. I upload videos at 8 o'clock on a Friday, Central European time, and I try to be live when things are uploaded. I said try, I'm not always there, but that also gives you an opportunity to interact with me. Thank you very much for listening.